The voices addressing women in post-war France seem to come from conflicting perspectives. In the one corner, la presse féminine upholding gender norms, and in the other, feminists contesting them. A lot of people, historians, would agree with Anne-Marie Dardignat, who described the presse féminine as a, quote, essential area in the manipulation of women. But not everybody. More recently, Vincent Soulier, in his 2008 book, argued that the presse féminine mirrored the evolution of mentalities and lifestyles and pointed the way to new ways of thinking and living. My entry to this question centers on Marcelle Auclair, author, journalist, and key figure in the creation of the Modern Women's Magazine in France. I had read her pieces in Marie Claire from my recent book, From Vichy to the Sexual Revolution, and at the time was struck by a 1957 two-page spread in which Auclair asked, "Why are women less free than men?" Quoting from readers' letters, Auclair basically took on the sexual double standard. Intrigued, I began to explore her background, and I turned up quite a few surprises. But I will skip over her early life and moved to the 1930s. She was born in 1899, so she's in her 30s. And at that point, she was working at Paris Soir, answering readers' questions under the name Tante Marcelle. She persuaded her boss, press entrepreneur Jean Prouvost, to create a new magazine for women, one that would go beyond fashion and beauty and include practical information to make women's lives easier. Simple recipes, advice about children and home, entertainment, travel, personalities, and books that they should consider reading, recommending books. So you can see in this very first image that there's a page on books to read. So in 1937, and you can see the very first issue, Prouvost launched Marie Claire with Marcelle Auclair, one of its leading voices. Over the next 2 years, Marie Claire built a wide readership. When war started in September of 1939, Marie Claire focused on providing practical information about blackouts and things like that. As the Germans approached Paris in June of 1940, the journalists and staff of Marie Claire left on what they call the Exodus. So they left Paris and they eventually landed in Lyon. Marie Claire resumed publication in November of 1940. So let's go to slide 2. Come on. Okay, there we go. So I went through every issue of the war years to analyze where the magazine stood on Pétain, on Vichy, on collaboration. And indeed, in its very first issue from Lyon, you can see the editorial on the left, 16 November 1940. Like so many other voices at the time, they were trying to understand the defeat and pointed the finger at France's many shortcomings. So a book that I recently reviewed about the defeat called that the decadence explanation, basically. So here's a quote: "Egoism, cowardice, small and large, poverty of the heart and spirit. We're done with that." Marie Claire from then on would focus on the beauty of life's true values: patrie, famille, travail. So you see what they've done in reverse order. Marie Claire has repeated Vichy's new motto, travail, famille, patrie. So following its first issue, in the next subsequent issues, there's a piece on children's letters to Pétain with all kinds of cute pictures. And then there was one more article on the Compagnon and Chantier de la Jeunesse. But by the end of 1940, the magazine shifted and pretty much dropped all specific mentions of Vichy and Pétain, and not only that, but at times contested elements of its conservative dogma and policies. So Auclair herself wrote an essay contesting the October 1940 law that fired married women from the civil service. Historians Isabelle Tournier and Danielle Waldman, who put together a dossier on abortion, describe Auclair's personal trajectory as, quote, particularly atypical. But it turns out, when I looked, that even before the war, she had advocated women's right to birth control, prefacing a 1935 book by two doctors, La Liberté de la Conception. She revised that preface for the revised edition of the book that appeared in 1954. Now that was a key year for Auclair because also in 1954, a new law allowed publications that had closed in 1944 but had not been the object of any prosecution to restart. Jean Prouvost, who after the war didn't try to restart Paris Soir, but created Paris Match, which you may have heard of, he wasted little time in launching Marie Claire under the editorship of Marcel Eidrich, this time without Marcelle Auclair. And actually the story is that it printed 500,000 copies for its first issue and it sold out within one day. But Heydrich found himself quickly inundated by letters from readers asking for Auclair. Clearly, in spite of her 10 years away from the magazine, Auclair had a following. Mediating between Prouvost, who complained that Auclair was a royal pain in the ass, and Auclair, who sensed Eidrich's mounting desperation, he finally managed to conclude a deal, and Auclair returned to Marie Claire. But quickly, in the late 1950s, she began using her perch to advocate change, challenging not just the sexual double standard, but also the 1920 law banning contraception, for example. In 1960, she used Marie Claire to undertake an even more radical effort. Having read years of desperate letters from her readers, she published a call in the November 1960 issue, "Help me put together the forbidden dossier." She asked readers who knew of cases of abortion to send her an unsanitized, completely honest account. Unlike letters that they'd sent her before, Auclair warned them not to sign their names, advised women or writers living in small towns to go to a different town to post the letter, and make sure, she closed, that nothing in the account would allow anybody to identify who was involved. She would not be able to publish her report in Marie Claire, she lamented, but she promised to bring it to, quote, powerful personalities who determine your fate. She said in a thing she wrote about it later, she thought she was going to get about 50 letters. In fact, she received 581 letters and decided she had to go beyond her original plan. So in 1962, nearly a decade before the manifesto of the 343, Auclair, together with her longtime collaborator Jean Doudman, published the Livre Noir de l'Avortement. Auclair wrote a preface titled The Silence of Death. She briefly introduced each chapter, but otherwise, as Tournier and Vaudman point out, she let women speak for themselves. An overview in her preface broke down the 581 respondents. 440 were, sorry if this is showing, 440 of them were married women, 81 single, 21 divorced, 8 widows, and even 31 men wrote letters. Only 57 of the responses were hostile, 50 from women, 7, she doesn't say from men, she says 7 from priests. The 581 letters testified to some 2,960 abortions, 2,369 of them clandestine, abortions that didn't result in the need for medical intervention, which she calls ni vu ni connu. 220 of them landed the woman in the hospital, and 82 cases involved a woman who died. Blown away by the magnitude of the suffering, Auclair claimed that the only thing comparable to the book she'd just produced, this black book, was Defoe's Year of the Plague. And I kind of felt like I had to mention that given what we're going through in 2020. Each chapter consisted of excerpts from the letters. From a few sentences to several pages, Auclair let them tell their stories, starting with a chapter on married women, many of whom already had children, but said that they couldn't afford more, or that given the housing crunch, they had no space for another child. Women described alcoholic or abusive husbands. Some of them had medical conditions that had their doctors warning them not to get pregnant again, that it would be risky. Some of them had children with disabilities to care for. The next chapter went on to the widows, single and divorced women. One chapter she titled simply, what a man can be capable of doing. And in this chapter, it became clear that a significant number of men were the ones who demanded the abortion. Illustrating men's ignorance of what women went through, Auclair describes a conversation she'd had with a priest about the anguish and fear that women lived with month in and month out the terror of not knowing, basically waiting for their periods every month, not knowing if they're pregnant. The stress, Auclair pointed out, pushed some women into serious depression. At that, the priest raised his shoulders and said, well, they're all more or less hysterical. Infuriated, Auclair wondered how men would respond if they had to live every month waiting in fear of discovering a pregnancy that could overturn their lives. Another chapter called The Museum of Horrors included fetuses preserved in a jar in a refrigerator. That was a woman whose husband made her abort the baby. One shoved in a shoebox. And she closed with this neighbor describing the sound of blood gurgling as her friend bled to death after a botched abortion. Le sang qui faisait glou-glou. Men's letters got a chapter, as did letters from people in the medical professions, and in the final chapter, some very moving letters from people, including some doctors who had been convicted under the law. Auclair kept her original promise. In the appendix, she included responses from 16 of the prominent people to whom she'd sent her manuscript, including Guy Mollet, who had been prime minister and head of the SFIO, a lot of prominent medical doctors, a film director, André Caillat, who directed Jeux Interdits, amongst other things, journalists, editors, a Catholic canon, the former mayor of a small town, a woman who called on all women to vote and get involved in politics. Demographer, and I would call him also pro-natalist, Alfred Sauvy, in contrast, in a brief and crabby letter, objected to the potential damage the book might cause. Marie Claire's in-house doctor called on women to fight. And this is a quote, "Nothing changes without struggle." And again, pertinent, I think, today. Finally, and I'm not sure why she sent it to him, Paul-Émile Victor was chief of the French polar expeditions. And he responded that if it could lend any weight at all to your initiative, you have my unreserved support. All right. The book then includes the French law and then a survey of the legal situation around the world. According to Lisa Greenwald's recent book on feminism, Daughters of 1968, Redefining French Feminism and the Women's Liberation Movement, Auclair's book, the first public statement in defense of abortion rights by a mainstream cultural icon, galvanized public opinion. Tournier and Voldman, who put together the dossier, on the other hand, they said that it had little impact and ended up in the pulp mill. But all three of them agree that her courage opened a door. After the Black Book, according to Tournier and Voldman, the lead weight lifted just a little bit. Debates on legalization could finally begin. And several books followed shortly after. 1963, Anne-Marie Dolan-Roulier published La Vérité sur l'avortement. 1964, Francine Dumas, article called L'avortement, il faut en parler. So again, how important it was, it's hard to say, but it clearly had some impact. Auclair continued to advocate beyond print, something that when I found and met with her grandson, he put me onto. So I went to the Inatech and I found that in 1966, let me shift slides, she appeared on a television interview broadcast called Face à Face, hosted at that time by Robert Barrat. The format, as you can see, was a round table with a group of people from various backgrounds focused on a specific topic. Vatican II had just been completed in December of 1965, so the guest of honor that week was Cardinal Veuillot, Archbishop of Paris. Of the four panelists, and I'm sure you'll be shocked to discover that Auclair was the only woman, it took her 34 minutes before she managed to cut in with her own question. She described Vatican II's impressive closure, the Pope blessing various prominent figures, actors, scientists, professors, even, as she put it, a blind man with his guide dog. But she noted, there had been no women, not a mother with her child, not even a group of nuns. Unfazed, Veuillot waxed on in very patronizing tones about the Catholic Church's deep love and respect for women. You can see from Auclair's eyebrows, this is from that part of the interview, she is not impressed. And so she comes right back at him, and she says that, many of her readers, she said, had expressed an idea that she herself had caressed just a little bit. And here I'm quoting, sort of not This is a little bit awkward, but the church is anyway a little, is it truly misogynist? Stunned, Veuillot looks around the table at the other men, throws his hands in the air, and makes that familiar puff gesture, and made no attempt to respond. And there's a story about that, because I did actually burst out laughing. Auclair, seconded by Barat, continued to press, prompting Veuillot to complain that there were so many more women who attended Mass these days that some people call us a women's religion. Women, he insisted, were equal members of the community of believers. His closing salvo, all we need to do is mention the name of a certain Virgin Mary. You cannot say that the church overlooks women. So the discussion continued, with Auclair highlighting several general and specific ways in which the church excluded women from many of its functions and from the hierarchy. Visibly frustrated, and let's move to the next slide, at times you can see that she's got her hand as in fists, and she at times mimes pounding the table with her fists. And then finally, getting towards the end, she brought up an even thornier issue. She said, I think you're expecting this question. It's the question basically of birth control. And she said that truly, for the majority of women, it's agony for women. They're anguished. Auclair, in her 60s by then, pointed out the issue is not about me. It's not personal. She asked on behalf of her readers, what would Veuillot tell women wanting to know the church's position? Well, indeed, Veuillot was ready for the question. He agreed it was indeed a serious issue that touched millions of women. He reassured Auclair that the church took the issue seriously. So seriously, he said, that it was taking the time to study it carefully. The Pope, in view of the importance of the issue, had created several committees tasked with examining the issue. And those committees, he proudly noted, included married men and women. The study was ongoing. Now, at that point, another member of the panel jumped in and said, well, you know, studying the issue is all well and good, but couples face an immediate problem. What, he asked, does the church instruct people, their priests basically, to tell couples who in confession, for example, hint that they may be using birth control? Couples had no time to wait for a study. They needed an answer. Veuillot then sort of fought back. He accused the panelists of suggesting that this was a simple problem. He said the church would have its response in just a couple of months. Auclair cut in again, insisting women were on the verge of despair. Marriages were breaking apart. Veuillot pushed back. The church, he pontificated, does not invent its doctrine. A response requires scrutinizing scripture to uncover what God had to say about the issue. Only then could the church interpret God's thinking on conjugal life. And he warned her she might not be happy with the answer. Auclair and Barat pressed on a bit longer, but then with time running out, Barat closed the show, asking Veuillot about a headline that had recently appeared in the New York Times. Is God dead? Long story short, Veuillot said no, he's not. Like the Black Book, Auclair's interventions were head-on, confrontational, lending her clear support to the fight for birth control and abortion rights. Forces in France were clearly shifting by the time she appeared on television, but I would argue that the open and forceful advocacy of this, as Greenwell puts it, this mainstream cultural icon, linked to an immensely popular magazine, known for writing the lives of saints, not linked in the public's mind with any feminist cause or movement, that it might have played some role in that shift. The Neuwirth law that legalized birth control passed the very next year, 1967. Abortion would wait till 1975. So I'm going to close by saying that as a person, in her words, in her works, and in her actions, Auclair complicates our usual categories, expanding our understanding of feminism. Thank you.